I got a question for you. Did you know that there are too many sequels and remakes being made? Did you also notice that the sky happens to be blue? We live in a day and age where it feels like the general audience is hungrier for original projects than ever, but that doesn't always tend to be the best way to make your money back. So these filmmakers will look to other forms of media for inspiration. And although a lot of the time the executives behind these movies are just trying to cash in on a recognizable IP, that doesn't mean that making an adaptation is inherently a bad thing. Book adaptations have led to some of the most beloved movies, with some of the most successful recent TV shows being no different. You could consider the Marvel movies to be adaptations, and we wouldn't have anime as an art form without the manga that these shows are based on. So in this video, what I'm going to do is go through a list of some of my favorite types of adaptations and talk about what I think makes them good. Along the way, I'm also going to be talking about some bad adaptations that I think make some mistakes that should be avoided. All so I can answer the question, okay, so we're going to start with the adaptations that I think have yielded the best results and what is probably the most popular type of adaptation. When a book adaptation comes out, it's almost to be expected that the movie isn't going to be a beat-to-beat recreation of the book. I mean, this book has 448 pages. The typical screenplay only has about 100 to 130. So obviously, we're not going to be able to tell this entire story in the length of a feature film. But in the case of Jurassic Park, I think a lot of the changes that Spielberg and co. made did make the movie better. A lot of the characters weren't really changed a ton from the book, but I think the movie did a lot of them more justice. Ian Malcolm, especially. You remember that scene where we're first introduced to Malcolm and Jeff Goldblum is just chewing scenery the entire time by being the most charming man to ever exist?
Dr. Sattler, I refuse to believe that you aren't familiar with the concept of attraction.
Yeah, here's how that went in the book. Hey guys, it's me, Ellie Sattler. Oh, hey, you're wearing all black. It's hot outside. Don't you think that's a bad idea? You're very pretty. Okay, thank you? I could look at your legs all day. What the fuck? A better example would be John Hammond. The movie turns him into this entrepreneur that just wants to share his dream with the world. He's not really in this to make money. In the book, he plays much more of a villain role. He wants Jurassic Park to be an attraction for the 1%, so a lot of the commentary in the book about corporate greed comes from him. I kind of like how the movie doesn't really have an actual villain apart from the dinosaurs. Like, Dennis Nedry isn't really the main antagonist or anything. He's just the inciting incident that leads to the dinosaurs escaping. Speaking of Nedry, the movie was also changed to be way less gruesome than the book. I'm gonna play you the clip of Nedry's death, intercut with me reading you the same scene from the book.
The dinosaur had spit in his eyes. He couldn't see anything and his terror was extreme. He stretched out his hand, waving them wildly in the air to ward off the attack that he knew was coming. And then there was a new, searing pain, like a fiery knife in his belly, and Nedry stumbled, reaching blindly down to touch the ragged edge of his shirt. And then a thick, slippery mass that was surprisingly warm, and with horror, he suddenly knew. He was holding his own intestines in his hands.
Gave you a little dramatic reading there. Hope you appreciated that. I understand why they didn't go with that tone for the movie. They wanted to make a PG-13 family adventure, not a horror movie. I get that. But my biggest issue with the Jurassic Park franchise is that they never really went back to those horror elements. They barely did it with the newest one, so if they're just gonna keep making these movies, that's something that I hope to see more in the future. A more recent book adaptation that actually makes good changes to the source material is Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. I already gave a full review of this movie in one of my other videos, and I don't want to repeat myself too much, so I'm not going to be going as in-depth with Frankenstein. But my favorite change that they make is Victor Frankenstein didn't have an abusive father in Mary Shelley's book. Yeah, my favorite change is that they made his father abusive, but that change provides more context to why Victor treats the creature so terribly and then turns the creature into a metaphor for breaking the abuse cycle. So making changes can be a good idea for the story that you're trying to tell. What probably isn't a good idea, though, is taking a story that uses animals to represent different social classes during the Russian Revolution and turning it into a wacky children's animated comedy. We're not gonna have Joseph Stalin Pig be the main antagonist. We're gonna add an evil billionaire, because that's something that I think the world needs more of. Taking something like The Bad Guys or Paddington and turning those into comedies targeted at children makes sense because those books were originally targeted at children. But Animal Farm? Gonna do that with Animal Farm? That would be like if a 1984 movie came out and it was like, Winston Smith was an average guy until he embarrassed himself in front of his crush. He now has to go throughout all of history to try to erase her memory of it happening, all so he can get a chance at having a date with her. This summer, follow Winston Smith as he goes on a series of wacky, hijink-filled adventures, all accompanied by his big brother. I don't understand why they would take a more mature book that's mostly read by like sophomores in high school, so like 14 to 16 year olds, and make it targeted at like 8 to 10 year olds, rather than just taking a book that's already made for that demographic and trying to make that into a movie. And I think one of the best examples of a book adaptation made for younger kids is Captain Underpants. I genuinely think that this is an amazing adaptation. Rather than something like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, where the first movie is based on the story from the first book, this movie takes different elements from various different Captain Underpants books to tell a new story, which is a great decision to make with a long-running franchise. It's both rewarding for longtime fans of it and serves as a good first introduction to anybody who wasn't familiar with the books. Since Captain Underpants is a comic character dreamt up by the two main characters, the movie embraced that by having it as if they are aware they are in a movie, by having them break the fourth wall a ton. My favorite example of this is George and Harold interrupting the big final fight to do it in the Flipperama style from the books. They even have Harold rip the page, which is something that I would always do. Every Captain Underpants book in my elementary school library would always have a rip on the Flipperama pages. So not only did they bring these books to life, but they also brought the feeling of reading one of these books into the movie. A lot of the appeal of a book adaptation is seeing the story that you can only picture in your brain brought to life. Especially because when you read a book, you are pretty much getting a completely different experience than everybody else who read it. Yeah, you're reading the same story, but the way that you're picturing it probably isn't the exact same way that others pictured it when they read it. Captain Underpants doesn't really have that because it already had a pre-established art style that it just needed to translate to 3D, but something else that you don't really have that luxury with is comic adaptations are interesting because there isn't a lot of direct adaptations like with books. Usually just small elements from specific comic runs are brought into the movies, like Spider-Man making a deal with Doctor Strange to have everybody forget his identity is from both Spider-Man One More Day and One Moment in Time. But No Way Home isn't just those comics brought to life, it's just taking that event and using it to tell a new story. Even going all the way back to the first Iron Man, it wasn't made because Iron Man was some super popular Marvel character like Spider-Man or the X-Men. They just wanted to make a movie using the character. Making a movie inspired by comics kind of creates this cycle of inspiration because the filmmakers will take inspiration from the comic writers, but then the comic writers can take inspiration from the changes that the filmmakers make to make new comics. Guardians of the Galaxy is a good example. Before the MCU, Star-Lord was much more of a serious character. The name Star-Lord actually had some weight, whereas in the movie, they turned it into more of a joke. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. That change worked for the sci-fi comedy that movie was. And now, ever since then, Star-Lord has been portrayed more like he is in the movies. But I think that Marvel ended up learning the wrong lessons from this, especially towards the back end of the multiverse saga. Some of the projects felt like they abandoned the comics altogether, to the point that the writers behind these shows were told to not read the comics that they were supposed to adapt. Like I said, it's not like the other MCU projects were the most comic accurate things, but at least the changes they made to the comics came from a place of inspiration for the betterment of the story, not just so they could have a cool fight scene. So Marvel has listened to the audience, and it looks like that cycle of inspiration is continuing because the movies now seem to be much more inspired by the comics. I think that's why so many people are excited for the upcoming DC universe. They're really putting their comic influences at the forefront. Superman really wears its comic influences on its sleeve by having the suit be an amalgamation of a bunch of different comic Superman suits, bringing back that Boy Scout-like energy and turning the Superman character back into a symbol of hope. I really love how bright the colors in this movie are, especially after all of the other big screen Superman adaptations having pretty drowned out color. A lot of those projects seem like they were afraid to bring in the bright and colorful silliness of the comics, and instead focused on making them more grounded and gritty, which is kind of a big reason that I'm skeptical about that upcoming Lantern show. Now, I think a lot of fans are being a little overcritical of this teaser, like, oh, Hal Jordan doesn't have a green outline around him, and the suit is supposed to be made from energy from the ring, not a physical suit that he wears, but nobody was making those complaints when Guy Gardner was flying around. So let's calm down. There's still plenty to criticize about this teaser without being nitpicky. At least from what we've seen so far, it doesn't seem to be embracing what makes Green Lantern special to so many people. These characters are space cops, and that job sends them on these grand adventures across the cosmos, and they seem to have taken that and turned it into just another basic HBO cop show. I am a sucker for a good cop story, so I'm gonna hold out hope that this show is still gonna be good, but did this have to be a Green Lantern show? I feel like Detective Comics has plenty of other cop-like characters that would fit the vibe that this show is trying to go for. But honestly, I don't blame DC for not wanting to make a more comic-accurate Green Lantern story. I blame Ryan Reynolds. He ran that Green Lantern is bad joke into the ground to the point where now the brand itself is too embarrassed to do anything similar. This is just a teaser. We haven't even seen any of the other lanterns that are going to be showing up, so hopefully this is just a bad first impression because the DCU hasn't really been great with those. But my biggest issue with the teaser is just the color grading because it looks so basic. I didn't expect it to have like a green tint to it or anything, but compared to Superman, where the color grading is just so bright and colorful, I expected something similar for the characters that are, you know, based on colors. Color grading is also something that I'm kind of worried about with the upcoming Supergirl movie. It's supposedly based on the Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow book by Tom King, and a big part of the appeal of that comic are these sprawling, colorful artworks that just take up entire pages. And then you look at the movie and it kind of just looks like every other blockbuster. But some of the changes that they are making to the source material, I am really excited about. For starters, this is creme, and this is way more intimidating than shirtless Ginger Man. But it's also really cool that they're including Lobo, because the original Woman of Tomorrow comic book was originally pitched as a Supergirl versus Lobo comic. As I said, with comic adaptations, they aren't really based on any specific comic run, more just taking elements from different runs, but something that you can't really say that about is in... Gonna put a little spoiler warning here for Invincible. I'm gonna be talking about both the show and the comics, but I'm not gonna be talking about anything in the comics that the show is yet to cover. Like, I'm not gonna be talking about anything that they're probably gonna cover in season 5 or beyond that. A big part of what makes Invincible special is that if you read the comics, it is pretty much a one-to-one recreation of the story, with some smaller elements being expanded upon. They're able to take simple scenes from the comic and branch them out into these amazing emotional moments. It really feels like the showrunner are trying to improve the comic story rather than just telling the same story again. Shrinking Ray is a significant improvement from her comic counterpart, who was pretty much just a joke of a character. Debbie is also way better than her comic version, with so much more love and care brought to her character. But if you do a direct adaptation, it creates this issue where if you want to know what happens next in the story, you can just kind of read it. This kind of creates a divide in the fandom between the people who have read the comics and the people who only watched the show. When season 3 was coming out, I had only read the first compendium, so I didn't really know a lot about what was going to happen. I knew about the Invincible War and that the Conquest fight was immediately after that, but besides that, I didn't know anything really. But for that period of time where the episodes were coming out, everywhere I went, I kept seeing the same thing. My skeleton. No, this can't be. Surely this is the product of some sort of generative artificial intelligence. And slowly, the realization came to me that I was about to watch my favorite character die. Fuck! As I said, at the time, I had only read the first compendium because I was of the mindset that if the show was a direct adaptation, I wouldn't want to read the comics and know what happens next. But then I figured, if every Invincible fan is gonna spoil every little thing in the comment section of every video I watch, I might as well go ahead and read them. So I bit the bullet, I bought the second compendium, and I read through it. But as the 4th season has come out, I almost wish I didn't read the comics. I love seeing the fights brought to life, but I don't know, it feels like they have less stakes. The Conquest rematch was cool as shit to watch. I rewound this scene like 3 times because there is just something about watching it unfold that you do not get from just flipping a page. Especially the way the fight ended was a genuine shock. For about 2 minutes. I knew exactly what was gonna happen after that, because I had already read it. I feel like my teacher just told me to study for a test that I already have a graded copy of. I know almost everything that's gonna happen, and the only way that I'm not gonna is if they deviate from the comics. At the end of episode 6, I got really excited for a second. Holy shit, this is where he dies in the comics. Are they actually gonna bring him back? Nope. course they're not. Why would I get my hopes up? I know a lot of people didn't really like episode 4, but I genuinely love that the original creators behind Invincible are now getting the opportunity to do storylines that they never got the chance to do in the original comics. So I think I've come to the conclusion that I'm not gonna buy the third compendium. I don't want to go into this show knowing everything that's going to happen, especially when some of my favorite things from the show are when they deviate from the comics. Because this show is amazing. It's able to bring the comics to life while improving upon its faults. Book and comic adaptations are the most popular type of adaptation by far, but in recent years there's been a new type of adaptation that I've been seeing popping up everywhere, and that is the main issue with a lot of video game adaptations is the same issue that a lot of book adaptations have, where if you're doing a movie, you don't really have enough time to adapt the full story. With most games, all the cutscenes added together can be anywhere from 8 to 12 hours long. That's why I think so many video games are being adapted into TV shows, a format in which they actually have enough time to tell those stories. But if you're just gonna tell the same story that I've already played through, why would I want to just watch it? Because for a lot of these stories, the best way to tell them is, big surprise, in a video game. There are so many moments in these games that are so reliant on you being the player during those scenes. So if you tried to recreate that, it wouldn't have as much impact. Which is why I think so many video game adaptations have, instead of following the story from the games, taken the route of just telling a story that takes place in the world of the video game. That's what Zach Cregger seems to be doing with Resident Evil. Iron Lung really expanded upon the world from that game. A Bloodborne movie was just announced. I expect that to do a similar thing. But looking at specifically horror game adaptations, I think that Five Nights at Freddy's is the most interesting example, because those games probably have the most dissected and theorized about story, so there was no way they were gonna squeeze all that into one movie. They just took the core 4 mascots and the basic premise of them hunting down the Night Guard with a few references to the game's wider story sprinkled throughout. Now, does this way of adapting the games make for a good movie? Debatable, but I like that rather than just telling the game's story, they took the elements and the characters from those games and just used those to tell a new story. And just like how in the gaming industry, Five Nights at Freddy's started a wave of mascot indie horror, it looks like it's going to be doing that with movies as well, which is something that I am excited to see. I feel like a lot of elements from these games could lend themselves to a movie a lot better. A lot of indie horror games are pretty much just a bunch of back-to-back chase sequences, and that can be scary the first time, but then you die like twice and it just gets annoying. Where in a movie, that would just be a chase scene. No shit. And a lot of these games' biggest issue is that they release their story in chapters over long periods of time. Like, they want to reveal some stuff to keep you interested, but they don't want to reveal too much so that you keep coming back, which leads to a lot of the stories for these games being very convoluted.
Now, the reason I'm getting burnt out on mascot horror is because I feel like the story is so ambiguous sometimes that I have no idea what's going on. I need a little bit of hand-holding, I'm not gonna lie. I'm not ashamed of it.
And having a movie that's a more streamlined version of the game's story could help fix that problem. And with the recent popularity of video game movies, it's no surprise that the two most iconic video game franchises have thrown their hat in the ring. The Sonic and Mario games are so popular with so many different characters and storylines that you could draw inspiration from. And with these long-running franchises, the people behind these movies often grew up playing the games that they're adapting. So you're actively getting a real fan's input. Once again, the Mario movie simply just takes place in the Mario world, and it does that by having Mario and Luigi fall through a portal into the Mushroom Kingdom. Why does that sound familiar? But even though it didn't really follow a specific game, it still had that classic Mario story formula. That formula being, Bowser's got somebody, and Mario's gotta save him. They did it with Luigi in the first movie, and they apparently did it with Rosalina in Mario Galaxy. I'm saying apparently because as I'm recording this, I haven't seen Mario Galaxy, but it's really funny to me that anytime there's a Mario story, it always reverts back to that damsel in distress dynamic. Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but you're just gonna keep doing the same thing in different ways. In regards to the Sonic movies, they're probably the most successful recent video game franchise, being 3 movies in with a 4th on the way. Rather than having the movie take place in the world of Sonic, it kind of does the opposite and takes Sonic out of his world and into ours. But besides having Eggman as the antagonist, it really didn't have a lot of game elements past the first few minutes and is more of a cozy road trip movie. The sequel added Tails and Knuckles to the mix, but rather than just doing the expected and having the 3 team up, they made Knuckles one of the main antagonists. artists. But of course, they still ended up teaming up by the end of the movie. But it was really Sonic 3 that was loud and proud with its video game influences, having a lot of the story be inspired by Sonic Adventure 2. Like the scene with Sonic jumping out of the helicopter being a direct homage to the opening of the game. The origin story for Shadow was adapted perfectly, and I loved that they weren't afraid to dive into some of the darker elements of his character, despite the movie being made for kids. But even though Sonic 3 was targeted at kids, that didn't make it any less enjoyable for anyone else who wanted to watch the movie. But something that I can't really say that about is the Minecraft's kind of weird because unlike a lot of other video game adaptations where they have storylines to pull from, Minecraft doesn't really have any storyline to pull from. Even beating the dragon is seen as like the end of the game, but it's not like the game is over once you do that. It's just the next step in your adventure in the open world. But because it doesn't have a storyline to follow, it doesn't really have characters either. Like Steve is just the default skin for a new account. He doesn't have a personality. He's not a character. He's a mascot. So that kind of created a issue for the writers of this movie. All right, guys, we have what is probably one of the most popular video games of all time to make a movie out of. Okay, I'm liking the sound of this. We do have one problem though. The main character doesn't talk and he also doesn't have any motivation. So how are we gonna make a good movie out of that? Does anyone have any ideas? Ooh, what if we embraced that by having him be a sort of silent protagonist and sending him on this grand adventure and letting that journey speak for itself? Okay, pretentious much? This movie's for children. Let's keep it simple. I don't know, we could hire a talented voice actor and do it in the style of our promotional animations. Animation is for babies. I can't take that shit seriously, and neither will our audience. Didn't you just say that we're making the Minecraft movie? There's gotta be some way to make this character work. You! What's up? New guy, what do you think we should do with Steve, huh? Oh! Well, you know, we could... you know. I've got it! As I said, it's not like Steve was this super complex character that just needed to be portrayed a certain way. But why is Jack Black just being himself? I hate it when actors don't act. As soon as you start just being yourself, you've kind of failed as an actor because you've forgotten that you are not your character. It's also one of the quickest ways to pull you out of the movie. When I first saw this movie, I remember thinking, why would you make this live action if you're just gonna animate all the mobs anyway? But seeing how the movie was made and the many practical elements involved, I do see why this is the route they took. It was very clearly made with a genuine love and effort to bring the game to life. I just wish that came through more in the movie, because there are so many scenes in this movie where it is glaringly obvious that the characters just aren't there. Even in the ones where they are on actual sets, they cover them in After Effects to the point where it looks like they aren't. And in like every fight scene in this movie, you can just tell that they aren't fighting anything, doing a little Brendan Fraser, but not as good. And it's just another thing that pulls you out of the movie. And probably my biggest issue with this movie is they took a game that is iconic for its music and barely used any of it. They gave us the little you know that one? And then I think they also played Pigstep, but that's it. When it comes to any montage or action sequence, they just do the typical movie thing of throwing a bunch of trendy pop songs over it. And I don't know, the Dayglow song was pretty good, but why during the big zombie fight scene did you use the song from the Applebee's commercials? This is more of an issue with modern movies in general, not just this one, but a lot of the dialogue just feels unnecessary, for a lack of a better word. Like, you don't gotta explain everything. You don't gotta tell me the message of your movie. I can just get that out of the movie.
You got constraints, judgments, obstacles.
Yeah, I know. But I'm gonna go make stuff anyway.
Wow. The moral of the story. Thank you for telling me the moral of the story. But despite my nitpicks, there are still some things that I liked about the movie just as a lifelong fan of the game. It was supposed to feel like the first time logging into Minecraft, and I think that is done really well, at least in the first half of the movie, and I just wish it was more relevant all throughout. Since Minecraft didn't have any storyline to follow, I assumed that the movie was gonna follow the game progression. Like, the characters would get stuck in Minecraft, and then they'd have to go to the Nether, and then the end, where they would fight the dragon, and then the portal would send them home. But the people behind this movie didn't want to do the expected, and instead had the piglins be the main antagonists. Which I think worked for the movie, and it does leave the dragon fight open for the sequel that was announced recently. Why they didn't want to do what was expected? I don't know. I actually do like that they ended up adding a bunch of stuff that wasn't accurate to the Minecraft game. If your whole movie is about how creativity has no limits, why limit your creativity? And it's not like we haven't gotten great Minecraft stories that aren't the most game accurate things. We have seen numerous times that making changes to the source material can be a good thing. But what happens when you just kind of don't feel like it? It's really funny to me that people will complain about Disney coming out with too many sequels or too many live action remakes, and then they announce a sequel or a live action remake and everybody's like, holy fucking shit! Usually when you try to adapt characters that were only ever meant to be portrayed in 2D animation, you're kind of diving headfirst into the uncanny valley. Alice in Wonderland haunts my dreams, and don't even talk to me about the really loud house. A lot of live action adaptations try to make the more cartoony aspects realistic, but I think some of the best live action adaptations are the ones that embrace the cartooniness of the original. The way that the Looney Tunes are adapted into Looney Tunes Back in Action in the Space Jam movies is great, with the Who Framed Roger Rabbit style of just plopping the cartoon characters into the adventure of the movie. And the live action How the Grinch Stole Christmas is one of the few remakes that I like more than the original. And a lot of the appeal of the original is the old school rusticness of the animation, but it's like 40 minutes long, so can't really turn that on for a Christmas movie night with the family. But these types of movies aren't really what you think of when you think of live action adaptation. Most likely you're thinking of live action remakes, which thanks to Disney have been running rampant for years. Now, if you ask the Disney marketing team why they've been doing this so much recently, they'll tell you that they just want the next generation to have the ability to experience these stories for the first time on the big screen. But really, it's just because producers are much more likely to throw a bunch of money behind something that has already proven to be profitable rather than, you know, taking a risk with something new. The biggest issue with a lot of live action remakes is if you take the animation out of these animated movies, you're ignoring a big part of what makes the original so special. You're also running the risk of taking the life out of the scene that you're adapting. With the original Lion King, you can tell what each character is feeling because they can show facial expressions in all of the animals. Whereas if you try to translate that onto realistic animals in an effort to make it more like a documentary, you don't have that free range to show emotion. You can make them look scared, and you can make them look angry, but that's about it. At a certain point, the performances are carried entirely by the voice actors. I don't really think that the live-action Lion King does anything too egregious to the original story because it's pretty much just the same movie, but that's where a lot of live-action adaptations fail, because if you're just making the same movie again, you're not adapting anymore. You're imitating. I kind of had the same issue with the live action How to Train Your Dragon because, once again, it's pretty much just the same movie. They added a couple more jokes, drew some scenes out a bit longer. I think they gave Astrid the added motivation of wanting to be chief, but it's not like that had any effect on the rest of the movie or anything. All the stuff they added was cool, but they took away the scene of Hiccup and the little dragons, where he finds out how to defeat the Red Death at the end of the movie.
Not so fireproof on the inside, are you?
Why would you cut that out and keep everything else the same? That's like the most important thing he learns from his time with the dragons. And I think they did really well on the cast for this movie, but there are so many times throughout it where it feels more like actors waiting to say their lines rather than the characters saying those lines. Especially compared to the original, the dialogue can be pretty stilted.
He's going to get out there again. He's probably out there now.
He's gonna get out there again. He's probably out there now.
But for this movie, I think that it lends itself to a more realistic world a lot better than something like The Lion King. Seeing the dragons and these settings brought to life adds a certain tone and scale to the movie that the original just didn't have. But that's really all the praise I can give it. I'm not really a big fan of just making the same movie again, but I understand the hesitancy to not want to change too much, because if you change too much, you might disappoint the fans of the original. And if you don't change anything, what's the fucking point in doing any of this? That's kind of what I expect the live-action Tangled and Moana movies to be like, just the same movie with minuscule changes that won't really affect the story. But not every Disney live-action remake is an exact recreation of the original. I remember actually being really excited when the live-action Mulan came out because the original is probably my favorite Disney movie. But for some reason, I never got around to seeing it. But after making the time to watch it for this video, let me just say, I really wish I didn't do that. Where do I even begin? This movie completely loses what makes everything special about the original in every conceivable way. Mulan in the original gets in trouble because she doesn't do things the way that she is supposed to do them, and then the rest of the movie spins off from that core idea. But in the remake, it's just like, oh, you little stinker, made another mess, did ya? The whole opening pales in comparison to the original because it is somehow able to tell us everything that we need to know about Mulan in a few seconds. But then in the remake, it's just like, hey, this is my daughter, Mulan. She has chi, but that's quite odd to me because only boys have chi. They try to incorporate chi into the remake, which could be cool. To my knowledge, chi is like this life force that flows through you and everything in existence. That is a cool concept. It could be this almost the force-like energy that encompasses these soldiers. But if you take chi and only use it as a reason to explain why someone is just so gosh darn good with a bow staff, you're gonna sound like Kung Fu Panda. The reason that chi was brought into this movie wasn't because the writers wanted to explore that idea. It was so that they could have more fight scenes. Oh my god, the fight scenes. These are some of the worst and most jarringly cut fight scenes I have ever had the misfortune of watching. I'm gonna show you a scene from this movie. I have not added any jump cuts or changed anything about it. This is an actual scene in a movie released by Disney. You ready? Okay, here it is.
Join the others.
What the fuck was that? What was going on there? What happened in those few seconds? I think one of the most well-known things about the original is that after they discovered the field of fallen soldiers, there is no more musical numbers throughout the rest of the movie. It's an immediate tone shift as every character realizes the severity of the situation they're in, especially for Li Shang, whose father was a part of that troop that now lays dead in that field. But the remake took the musical numbers out altogether, I'm assuming because they wanted to have that more serious tone throughout the whole movie. But they also changed it so that the general doesn't leave Li Shang to train the recruits. Instead, he does it himself. They also turned Li Shang into this character, Chen Honghui, and made him a recruit instead of the general. But because they changed that, they changed it from him being the son of the general to just being another guy. Which is why it confuses me that they still try to recreate that field scene, even though it has no personal stakes for any of these characters. This isn't a moment of realization for any of these people. This is a shallow imitation in an effort to make the audience feel something, and it fails. Change should be a good thing. I don't know how many times I have said that in this video, but every change they made to this scene made it worse. And that's not even the movie's greatest sin, because Mulan is not Mulan. In the remake, she's just a good fighter. That's literally all there is to her character.
She's the best warrior amongst us.
Why? That's not what made her interesting. Mulan is cool because despite her not being a very good fighter, she still finds ways to solve problems even if they aren't in the traditional way that she's supposed to do them. That's what the whole fucking movie's about. And it is completely lost in the remake, and by proxy, makes Mulan's journey feel so unearned. She's not getting better because she's coming up with out-of-the-box ways to solve her problems. She's getting better because she has magical kung fu powers. It's like she can't do it, and then she can do it. She can't do it, and then she can do it. She can't do it, and you're never gonna guess what happens next. The Lion King is good because of Simba's journey of self-discovery after his father dies. So if you take that out, it would be worse. Lilo and Stitch is about Nani fighting for and eventually getting custody of her sister. So if you take that out, it would be worse. And Mulan is about someone going against the grain and finding solutions that are outside of their society's traditional values. So if you take that out, it would be worse. I think a lot of old Disney movies work because they're just simple concepts that are executed really well. So I think the best way to adapt that is to take that simple concept and put a new spin on it. That's why I think the live action Jungle Book works so well. It's not just a shot-for-shot remake of the original, it just takes the core idea of Mowgli needing to leave the jungle so that he doesn't get killed by Shere Khan. All of the callbacks and references to the original feel earned and like they come from a place of love for the original and not just nostalgia captivate to get you to clap. This may be the same idea, it may hit the same beats, but you're getting something entirely different out of watching this movie. And I think that's what an adaptation should try to focus on. Not trying to recapture the magic of the first movie, but instead using your love of that first movie to create new magic so that the audience can love it too. So in conclusion, you can make a good adaptation as long as you are bringing the characters to life, listening to the audience and what they want from it, while making changes to the source material that both enhance and respect the material that you are adapting. And that, to me, is what makes a good adaptation. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to you specifically for making it to the end of the video. I hope you have a good day. Goodbye.
I call her honey, her body is tea. I'm body like I'm SP. You say that you body, well baby, let's see. We'll feel the story, you don't need to speak. Mono, we mono, capiche, capiche. Mono, we mono,